Welcome. You've splash landed into this Prosecco-laden podcast, straight into the woo-woo pool with the crew of Ohm-g. We're just a simple group of tragically imperfect and highly empathic BFFs, exploring a wide range of atypical topics with humor, grace, and curiosity. This is Ohm-g.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Ohm-g Podcast. My voice is not anywhere near as soothing as Chameleonaire's voice, but she and Ro are still out of town when we're recording today, so they are here with us in spirit. Thanks for joining us again. Today, we're actually going to pick up where our last episode kind of left off with questions submitted by listeners. And Alexandra had a really great one that we were all like, oh, wow, this is something that is not just an answer, but a conversation.
We need to take time with that one.
Yes. So, Alexandra, would you mind for our listeners to repeat kind of what your friend had asked you?
So this question came from a friend who always asks amazing questions, like really thought-provoking questions. So this one comes as no surprise. Huge shout out to Ferris. She asked me that if you knew everything you needed would be taken care of, money, health, everything, the universe would provide that, what would you have done differently at this point in your life? And my addition to that question is, how would you integrate what you would have done differently into your future?
Like, what would your life look like if you had done that thing?
Mm-hmm. And going forward, how can you incorporate that?
Right.
That is a power-packed question.
Yes.
Who wants to start off?
Because it also, the second part there requires belief in the universe that it will provide for you. So
Right.
It's a huge, and guys, I'm not perfect at this. I'm still working on it. So none of us have the full answer here.
And Traveris, if you're listening, thank you. Like, pop off, girl, because that was amazing. That's like one of those where you actually have to like think about before, like really hard before you answer.
But I kind of feel like that when this group of people, when we came together, it's kind of like we are all on that journey of, I feel like we're kind of already at a place where we've started to accept that the universe has it all under control. And if we don't have to have a lot of faith, we just have to have faith.
Yeah.
That it's going to be taken care of. And all we have to do is ask and keep that vibration of open to receive. And it's going to be, so I feel like kind of like that part of that question is kind of like what brought all of us together, is that we were kind of in that place of opening our intuition and figuring out that that's actually true.
I agree.
So I think, like, to answer that directly, like personally for my life, I wish I'd gone to college whenever I finished high school. In our family unit, as I don't know if it was just as a woman or because of, my parents didn't have a lot of education, but college was not a subject of discussion.
Right.
And of course, at that time, I don't know what I would have taken, what kind of degree I would have had, unless you have a degree in all things wizardy and woo-woo, then that would have been awesome.
Still waiting on that Hogwarts letter, so whenever that owl wants to drop it off at my doorstep.
No. But I think if I had gone on that trajectory instead of, I got married at was I still 20? I think I was 20. Because I remember I ordered a drink whenever I was 20 at my wedding that night, and they served me.
And that was the scandal, not the wedding boo-boo, but the drink.
Right. Because all you got to do is have some confidence, and they believe you're over 21. But, I think my life would have been so much different if I had gotten an education as a woman in the South. I probably would not have been as dependent on my partner, my spouse, whoever, or maybe would have had less need to have someone. Of course, I always like to have someone because I like being in a relationship. I like that stability, that knowing that my person has my back. But maybe I wouldn't have jumped into some of the situations that I did if I had felt more independent, because that's still something that I struggle with, like wanting to be completely independent. And I like the way it feels to be independent. I feel powerful and strong. And then whenever I have to depend on somebody, it makes me feel weak and like not as smart.
Yeah.
And I think if I'd had that education, I could have built on that over the years instead of going back to school later in life. And
well, this is Chandra, and I agree with that. But for me, the quote unquote education that I got from college was less about the classes that I took and what I majored in.
Yes.
And more about like how to function as an independent person, like how to keep my own schedule and figure out what I needed to do next, and just prioritizing, because, even if you're living in a dorm, you've still got bills, you've still got like a phone bill, or it's kind of like, adulthood light.
That's a great way to put it.
Adult with training wheels.
Yes.
But you have to prioritize, okay, do I go to this movie or do I pay my phone bill?
Right.
How much money is left, even though you have a quote unquote meal card or whatever. And people, I'm talking about like college back in the 90s. So it may not be this way today, but how much money do I have left in this account? Because I need to make sure that's going to last me, however long I have left. But I mean, it's to me, that was more of what I carried forward than, advanced mathematics 301 that I took my junior year. I mean,
right. Like membership from that now, same here. Yeah.
And those things, I almost wish they teach you earlier in like high school so that you're not figuring that in college. Because I do feel like if you're going to go for like a liberal arts education, you should take the time to figure it out.
Yeah.
But my gosh, college education could be a whole other topic. So
yeah.
But I can see how not having that experience might affect someone's feeling of independence later in life.
Yeah.
And it depends on your family atmosphere too, and what are the beliefs in the family unit. And for our family unit, it was more about like the mother or the woman is the caretaker, and she takes care of the home, and she does it. She's not the woman out there bringing home the bacon,
blazing the trail.
Yeah. And I think that inside, I have been the trailblazer. I want to be out there making the money, but I put myself into the position of the wife, the mother, the person who's supposed to be taking care of things.
Yeah.
And that wasn't really true to me. It was true to
that was a belief of your family
parents,
unit, not necessarily personally.
Right. But it took me a long time to figure that out. Like, I'm going to be 50 next year. And, I'm just figuring that out here in the last, maybe 5 years.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
Well, but I mean, like in relation to that, so obviously Brenda and I are related. I know, clutch your pearls, who knew? But I think that, not now by any means, because my dad and my stepmom are like both very independent of each other. They own their own businesses, like they're, financially comfortable, whatever. But growing up with my dad and my mom, it was very similar to what you're describing, right? Because my mom was the daughter of a preacher. My dad grew up as your brother, right? Under being Seventh-day Adventist, where your parents were and are. And so sort of those traditional like gender roles of like the woman does XYZ, the husband does XYZ and provides for the family and whatever. And so college was never really like talked about a lot with us either. But I knew that I didn't want, and this is no shade to what my dad does. My dad does amazing work, and it's very like goal oriented and a self-starter and whatever. And I don't have
he's very good at what he does.
He is
makes good money
for sure.
So but there's all different ways to make money. It doesn't always have to be through education.
For sure. And there's so much value outside of money, right? That our society doesn't put focus on.
But I would also argue that education doesn't necessarily have to be a college degree. It could be apprenticeship type programs, which this country as a whole doesn't seem to emphasize, or maybe only in certain socioeconomic brackets it does. But anyways, again, more of the conversation about restructuring education.
Right. So I was the first person on either side of my family, like my dad's side or my mom's side, to go to college and finish a degree and then to continue on to grad school. And so in undergrad, I thought that I wanted to do English and be like a journalist. And so I did communications because that seemed more broad and like you could get a job. And then the more that I did it, I enjoyed communications, but I was like, there were like communication and gender and race and communication and different classes that I was taking that I was like, this is like sparking something in me that these like organizational communication, like that are like more practical type things in the workforce are not. And so I double majored in women's and gender studies. And so I decided, instead of quote unquote joining the scary real world after graduating, I would just go back right into grad school. And I went in for English, and I was like, I'll be an English teacher. That's what I'll do. I love reading and writing, and I want to share that with students and whatever. And I took one semester in the English department, and the students were very rude and egotistical and condescending. Like one time in a discussion corrected my grammar, like the way that I spoke. And I was like, oh, fucking gay. We're in the same class. Okay. And I'm the same professor. So like, you have no, like you may be a PhD student, I'm a master's student, whatever. But there was a queer theory class that I was taking that semester. And I was like, this is what I am interested in, what I want to do. And so I switched to women's and gender studies. And I always joke that I'm lucky that I don't work at like, you know, a Subway restaurant instead of like having like a job that gives me health insurance and whatever, because there's not like everyone constantly asks, well, what are you going to do with that degree? Well, what are you studying? What do you do? You know? And so constantly having to defend that was exhausting, but it's like, I think that was like one tiny little baby step of me thinking like, I'm going to end up where I am supposed to be regardless. And so if I'm going to take my time and spend this money or take out these loans in my case, that it should be something I'm passionate about and interested in. And I really was and still am.
So is there anything you would have done differently that would have changed your trajectory?
Right.
Like, have you thought about that?
I think as silly as this sounds and very like Walden, Henry David Thoreau, I think I would have in my mind, I would say like 6 months, rented an apartment or like a little house or something in Wilmington, because that's my happy place, and just written. Like taken off work or bartended or served or something to like just enough to get by, and wrote a book.
My husband actually did that after he graduated from college.
Really?
He and four of his fraternity brothers got together, rented a house at Curie Beach.
Yeah.
It wasn't oceanfront, but it was like on the other side of the street from oceanfront. Yeah. For a year. And he stocked groceries at night and swam in the ocean during the day. And, you know, I mean, for a year. I mean, it was just, you know, back then you think for a year, you know,
of course.
But now, you know, and at this age, we all look back and it was like, it was just a year out of his life. But how cool was that to just like essentially have no responsibilities? Like, you're not in a class where you're expected to make a certain grade, and in our case where we're taking out the loans or we're working while we're going to school to pay for it, that puts a lot more skin in the game.
It does.
Than, you know, if you're on a full ride or whatever. So,
right. Exactly.
Whether it's your parents paying or whatever.
Right.
But, you know, just with, you know, little responsibility to just have that year to totally decompress before entering the real world.
I bet it was such a formative year for him too.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure he still has tons of memories from that year specifically.
That's the one thing that we've had a very copacetic existence.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the same formative things growing up and everything. But that's the one thing that he's done that I didn't do that I'm super jealous of.
Yes.
And before we go into a quick break, I want to leave you guys with one last thought. I know we've talked a little bit about the education system here in the States and, you know, that we think it should be done differently. But I will say that I don't think any education is ever wasted. Yes. Particularly if you know how to integrate it into things, because you could study something like queer theory and take that into a job, and you shouldn't have to defend that.
Yeah.
Because education and exploring things you're passionate about should be the goal of education.
Absolutely.
You know? All right. So with that, we're going to take a quick break and we'll see you guys in a hot moment. Go fill up your glasses and join us again.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Chandra. Brenda and I would like to invite you as part of our podcast community to join us on either Facebook or Instagram Live each Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern U.S. time, where we give free oracle readings for fans of the show. Just follow us on our Ohm-g Podcast Facebook or Instagram page. You can post or DM us your questions there each week with the hashtag woo-woo-wisdom, and then tune in at 11 a.m. each Friday on our page to watch your free reading. If you can't join us live, don't worry. You can always catch it on the replay. This is just our way of saying thank you for being part of our woo-woo family. Hope to see you this Friday.
Welcome back. We are still talking about listener-submitted questions, and we're kind of still on that first question because there was so much meat in that question of kind of that one thing that you would do. If you could do anything differently, what would you do differently, and how would you integrate that into moving forward? And for me, I feel like I'm kind of there with Brenda Sue on that thing. Is I wish I had learned a lot earlier that, to broadly say it, that you're not defined by your family.
Yes. That
just because this was a certain belief and a certain way that things had been done previously in the family that didn't dictate it needed to be the way you did it going forward.
snaps for that, girl.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that you choose your friends, you're not able to choose your family. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you can love them and not necessarily get along with them.
Sure.
There's
love your family, choose your friends.
Choose your friends, absolutely.
That's from a Peter Sage TED Talk. Want to give credit where credit's due.
But yeah, I wish I had learned that a lot earlier. And I mean, really, it was only just a few years before I met this group of people that I'd even started kind of exploring, that train of thought. Yeah. So, a lot later in life, I wish I had integrated that a lot earlier.
One other thing that I wish I'd done, I wish I had become an airline stewardess whenever I finished high school, because I'd love to travel and I always wanted to, but I was too afraid. So I wish I had done the things that I was too afraid to do.
Well, that's a great segue, because that was not that specifically, but the answer I told my friend was travel. Yeah. And she said, but you have traveled. And I said, I know, but if money were no object,
yes,
I would travel more places more frequently. And what I love about travel is like to do the kind of fancy things that you would never do for yourself where you live, but also to get down, kind of do the touristy stuff where you see the whole city and then you go do the hole in the wall experiences.
Yeah.
Like that is what I would love, because it's learning and it's passion, and I love passion. So I would definitely, and there's so much of this world that I want to see. So hopefully, universe, work it out in a way that I will meet my person, I will have an amazing career, whatever that may be, and I will get to travel and maybe do that career while I travel.
Yeah.
So I would love to be able to travel for work and not go into sales conferences here and there, but, to do things that experience things, and also to do something that I love, but be able to go places and see I love other cultures and how other people do things. I find that really
not just
fascinating,
food, but the thought and the philosophy and
tradition
and the way they live every day, like all over the world. It's so different.
Well, that's one of the magical things about living in the time that we do live in. I mean, there's a lot of things that aren't so great about it too, but one of the magical things about it is just with technology, what you do doesn't have to necessarily coincide with travel, because now you can do whatever you do from anywhere. So, the fact that you want to travel doesn't necessarily mean that what you do has to be linked to travel, just that it affords you the benefit of being able to do it. You have the technology now to do it from anywhere.
Yeah. And I think back to our last episode, the conversation, the point that you brought up, Chandra, was that 2020 through 2022 seemed like this bookend kind of chunk of time. And I feel like we didn't really, as a society or as even globally, realize that so much of the work that we do, and it differs field to field, but can be done from home or through online or whatever, right? And I feel like that kind of it's part of this awakening process that started happening in 2020 of girl, I can stay in my pajamas and still do my damn job and get paid, I mean, not me. I still got, children to watch, but
some jobs,
plenty of jobs, right? And so that's really, I feel like, something that's going to shift in 2023. I feel like as more people are going to be able to travel with their work, or I don't know.
You could be business from the waist up and
party from the waist down.
Party from the waist down.
The return of the mullet in a different way.
Mullet, but make it fashion.
All right. So what was the next meaty question that we had?
So I had a really good question from one of our listeners, Julia. And she wants to know how we learned how to trust our intuition. And that is a big question right there.
Can I start?
Yes, please.
So this is Alexandra. Julia, I love this question. I think it's something we all struggle with and grapple with multiple times. My best advice is small steps. Not asking too much of yourself, because I think disbelief can get in the way of that. And pessimism, people make it sound so easy to believe in intuition and in the universe, and they can do it. I can't do it. Well, yes, you can, but there's small things. Take a look and actually enjoy the moment. Look at the things in life. Because I notice, me personally, I've been seeing so many repeating number patterns. Do I know specifically what those numbers in terms of numerology? Not necessarily, and sometimes it doesn't matter. But every time I see it, I say, thank you, universe, thank you, source, thank you, guides, thank you, something. If you're concerned about abundance and wanting to use intuition to grow abundance, every time you pay for something, say, thank you that I can pay for this. Thank you, universe. Just return that thanks back to the universe and take time to slow down and see signs. And sometimes signs may pop up much later. I know in the last episode I talked about the passing of my father, but my mom and I were talking about this, and there were quite a few things that had come up. And not that we think he knew he was going to die. I mean, it was just so sudden. But there were some odd things that had come up, and it was like, why was this happening? And it was like later, we were like, well, I guess we're glad that he did that, even if he didn't know why.
Right.
So trusting that intuition
will
come out.
That's the universe kind of handling things beforehand to make things easier, for
give yourself grace.
Right.
Give yourself a lot of grace in this process and learning to trust your intuition. Because I think we train that out of kids so young that it takes a bit of training time to come back. And no one's going to be perfect at it at the get-go. Yeah. So definitely.
And you're not going to be, your intuition isn't going to be 100% on all the time either. No, so understanding that as well.
Well, and
you got to get back in sync.
Well, we're human, and as humans, we're faulted.
Right.
So, doubt is ingrained in our DNA. So we're never gonna. I don't know that in this human body we would ever get to the place where we trust every single thing that pops into our head.
Right. Nor should we.
Exactly.
Right. But I think for me, my experience has been, one, don't discount the small things.
Mm-hmm.
Like if a seemingly, and we were talking about this even before we started recording, if you have a seemingly random event that happens, but something in your gut says there's a meaning in this, listen to it.
Mm-hmm. And I'd almost say that it's the smaller things that are almost more impactful and lasting. In terms of hitting you, like saying, I can trust my intuition, than something major happening going, oh, I manifested that, because that also happened recently to me too. And I was like, ooh, words do have power.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I mean, a great example of that is, just yesterday, crazy thing, I found a blister on my toe. Well, innocuous thing that happened. It wasn't painful. It was just, it was just there. Well, it ended up my husband had the same thing on the same toe in the same spot. And when he showed it to me, and he didn't even know that I had it. Right. He was just, we were sitting on the couch watching TV, and he said, look at this. Where did this come from? But in that moment, I knew, okay, there's a meaning in this.
Yeah.
And I mean, how random, how silly. And so now, even though I don't know what the meaning is, I knew not to disregard that.
Yes.
Right. So now I have my attention up. Yeah. My little ears are perked up, like a little cat. And I'm waiting for the meaning, because I know I'm going to be presented with whatever that meaning is.
And I think that's a great point. I think when people get into intuition or try to tap back into it, they're like, oh, it's going to pop up right away. You're like, hold on. I want to dispel that myth. And sometimes it's like you hold on to, as Chandra said, your ears perk up and you may forget about it. And then something happens and you're like, oh, that's what that was.
Right.
So definitely don't expect it to be instantaneous. And if it is, awesome. But if it isn't, don't get discouraged.
Right. Speaking of ears perking up, Brenda Sue, as always, I feel like you got something to say. So, girl.
Did you feel that? Was it my hand rising?
I felt it. It was your hand rising.
Wait just a minute. I have point number 2.
Oh, sure.
So
sorry.
And then I'll digress. But the second thing is validation.
Mm-hmm.
And the largest amount of growth that I have had is since I met you guys.
Yes,
because we were doing intuitive development together. And not that you need someone to pat you on the back and go, oh, you're right, but
it
just
helps.
But it helps. And to be in a group where you see people having the same struggles or having the same difficulties around it and being able to give each other the support. So to me, that's also validation. It's not just validation of, I saw a purple light. Oh, girl, I did too.
Yeah.
It's also the validation of, I had this happen and I discounted it, and having somebody else go, I've been through that same thing. So, just the validation of the journey as well as the validation of what you got psychically or what, or what intuition came through. So I feel like, number 1 is don't discount the small things. And number 2 is totally validation is super important to learning to trust because you don't just trust out of the gate.
Right.
Go ahead, Brenda.
Yeah, sorry. So I love to tell the story of Bob Benz, who was our teacher. He's now in spirit. And he would just throw you into the fire. So we do these intuitive development classes, and he was teaching us how to be mediums. And then he'd be like, well, we're going to do a public demonstration. And you'd be like, oh, crap. And that's where you just get up and you just get in front of a group of people and you just start doing it.
Wow.
Which is the scariest thing. And
Yes.
sometimes almost as scary as it is, it's almost easier to start that way.
Oh, I don't know.
It's immersion therapy.
It was
It's just
immersion
like-
therapy.
Out of the fire and into the frying pan.
And
And then it's like you have
But
no
I know-
choice but to trust yourself.
Well,
And that's
but-
hard.
But personally, from someone with the ADHD brain that goes in 9 directions when it's calm,
Yeah,
that puts me in 18 different directions
Mhm.
and I totally shut down.
right. It's like you're tuned out at that point
Yeah.
because it's
I get overwhelmed and I totally turn everything off.
yeah.
Well, I have to tell you about my first experience and then we'll move on. But we did this, group performance kind of a situation. And I got up and I got this guy's, I think they all brought candles. And so I held the candle or it was some object. And I was like, all I could see in my mind's eye was like Amish horse and carriage.
Hmm.
And he was like, I don't know what that means. And I'm like, oh God, I suck at this. And then as I'm doing the reading, he was like, oh, I grew up in Pennsylvania. Okay. Pennsylvania is where there's
Right,
so
Amish
much
country.
Amish country. And that's exactly how Spirit was giving me the symbol of it. But I didn't know. And he wasn't connecting. And so I felt like I was just a fraud.
Mm-hmm.
But, sometimes you get things and you don't really understand what they mean. And with doing mediumship, you just have to say exactly what you get.
Yep.
And then it's almost like putting a puzzle together and you
Mhm.
have to figure out where it fits. Is it a symbol? Is it a literal thing? Is it, what is it?
And I think the best is when you work with clients who are very open to that conversation. I feel like sometimes I've read for people, it's just like, I just want to know all these answers. And I'm like, okay, but this is about you. This is about that person taking ownership of that reading. So it's like having that conversation and going, I'm hearing blue butterfly on a green tree, or, I'm seeing this. And they go, well, oh yeah, there used to be this beautiful blue butterfly in the, garden. And I'd always look out the window of my childhood home. And you're like, oh, okay.
Right.
So things like that, it's just the small.
You have to trust.
Yeah.
You just have to trust that whatever you're getting
Which is
going to fit.
harder.
And sometimes it doesn't fit in the moment,
Mhm.
but it might fit later on for the person. So,
Yeah.
Aaron, what would you like to add to this conversation? I feel like we've been talking. You've got nothing to say.
No,
much.
I've just been listening, taking it all in. I kind of feel like, to Chandra's point earlier, I agree. I think that, sometimes it's difficult to trust your own intuition and that you feel like you need validation from others or like an outside source. And my first love language, which maybe we'll talk about in a future episode, is words of affirmation. And so I feel like, yes, girl, me and Chandra touching each other's knees, like, I got you. And so, I think that for me, like, seeing colors or feeling a specific emotion or feeling like a specific energy that had a word with it or something from someone else, I was like, okay, yeah, but, I still feel like I needed that affirmation from something or someone or somewhere else. And I feel like once we all kind of got together and started doing our intuitive development, like that's where that came from. And I was like, wow, I'm not crazy, number one, at least with this. Number two, it just became like a supportive community where, we could practice Reiki, we could practice doing a spirit circle. And, there were things that I would see the first time I did a spirit circle where I was like, that's silly. That's not there. And I think I've talked about this experience before on the podcast, but I'm terrified of snakes. And there's one coming up near me. And Brenda was like, Aaron, there's something, I feel like it's a snake that's right to the left of you. And I was like, well, won't he do it? You know what I mean? Message received. And so I think for me, like a big part of my awakening with intuitive development was, forming our group and you guys experiencing things similar or like validating what I felt or thought, which was super powerful.
Community is important.
Community.
So, Julia, to hopefully wrap up your question and to build off what Aaron was talking about, and it's going out of my mind, crap, is
when that happens.
practice in a judgment-free zone. Learning, building that trust with yourself, building intuition, knowing it may not happen instantaneously, and practicing in a judgment-free zone where you can be with other people and you're like, this is going to sound crazy. And they're like, yeah, I saw that too.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of affirmation on top of just being able to say it's going to be probably a big help.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Trust yourself. because you know you better than anyone else on the planet.
Well, and trust spirit, because they're not here to make a fool out of you. They're not here to let you down. If you show the interest in developing your intuition and you say, I'm going to trust you and I'm going to trust what you give me, then you're on the right track.
Exactly.
So trust yourself. All of y'all out there listening, just trust yourself.
Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Bye, y'all.
Bye. See you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. Please follow and subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a review. It's so easy to do and such a huge help for us. We appreciate your interactions so much. Want to join us at our table? Make sure to check out our YouTube channel and join our Facebook community. If you've enjoyed this content and wish to support us, take a look at our Patreon page. All information and links will be in our podcast description. Catch you next time.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM. Women's voices amplified.